I'm always a big believer in data. And if you follow data, you know that Houston is going to be the second most populous MSA in the entire country. With you young folks, I give you guys so much credit because social media is a powerful tool, and you guys are taking the information that you learn and hear, and obviously you can buy a duplex up to a fourplex the same way you can buy a regular house. So why not buy, more than one door?
I did a house hack in 2020. I used my stimulus check to get into a duplex. I was in Temple, which is Central Texas, and was able to get a duplex for $160,000. Crazy.
Wow.
Unheard of here in Houston. Don't even, just go ahead and get that number out your head. So I was able to get almost $100,000 in equity during that year and a half that I lived in that duplex. But if you're buying a house in 2024, 2025, what that impact will be in the next 10, 15 years.
Essentially, this is a great time to be a buyer, right? You see all of the inventory that's come into the market, both in established duplexes and also new construction duplexes. So if you're buying right now, it's an awesome time.
Well, welcome to another episode of the Blueprint Podcast. Again, guys, we are starting to leave the studio. So if you've noticed that the background's changing, the locations are rather changing, I'm really moving to a more experiential podcast. I want to help you guys see and hear the vision we're trying to help you accomplish, which is helping you grow your faith, build wealth, and make smart real estate decisions. Today, we are on our very first duplex tour. And so we actually have a live audience. Y'all can't see them. We got a group of folks who are here. They're going to be buying duplexes in the next year. And so we're bringing them out, going to add some value. So why don't y'all give it up for our live crowd. First one on the Blueprint Podcast. We have a special guest, and I'm honestly so blessed that I reached out and he immediately said yes. And so we have Mr. Gilbert here. This man has done millions of dollars worth of development in the multifamily duplex space. And so he's agreed to come on and just basically give us the play on how to invest in duplexes here in Houston. So we're going to talk about the best areas to develop in. We're going to talk about like how to structure your financing, all the details. So man, let's go ahead and get into it. So why don't you just go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll keep going.
Well, first of all, Mike, I just want to thank you for having me. I think it's definitely a privilege I don't take lightly, so thank you. But for people that don't know, my name is Gilbert Okoronkwo. We have a company called Grace Building Company, where we are a niche development company. We primarily focus on 1 to 4 door income property here in the greater Houston area. We've been doing this since 2016. Prior to that, I was a long-term real estate investor, still am. We started out traditionally like most folks do, buying like older single family homes, doing that kind of thing. And then we transitioned as we noticed a lot of the changes and then opportunity. I'm always a big believer in data. And if you follow data, you know that Houston is going to be the second most populous MSA in the entire country in some of our lifetimes. But this is happening now. And I think especially through this election, we're going to see a lot of interest come into Houston once whoever is selected as president gets their stuff going in 2026. You'll start to see some trends, especially in Houston. So it's a great time.
Yeah, absolutely. So why do you think duplexes are a good idea, or multifamily in general is a good idea for real estate investment?
Well, I think especially now, I always go back to the data. If you look at the changing time and the economics now, I mean, I grew up in a duplex community in New Orleans East and Bunker Hill. Those are some of my earliest childhood moments. And it's so much because of the use, right? There's so many buyers out there right now and renters that want to get into nice properties and get into established communities. And I think right now what the duplexes offer, especially now, is just a little bit more of an affordability. But then it's also like you have your own personal space and your own home, and that's whether you're renting it and owning it. And I think also it has a lowered barrier to entry, right? So especially with you young folks, I give you guys so much credit because social media is a powerful tool, and you guys are taking the information that you learn and hear. And, obviously you can buy a duplex up to a fourplex the same way you can buy a regular house. So why not buy, more than one door? A lot of times people say that your home isn't an asset, but buying a duplex or more definitely kind of changes that conversation.
Oh yeah, I'd agree with that. And it's so funny you said Bunker Hill, because that's actually the address for the first duplex I ever bought. So I did a house hack in 2020. I used my stimulus check to get into a duplex. I was in Temple, which is Central Texas, and was able to get a duplex for $160,000. Crazy. Wow. Unheard of here in Houston. Don't even, just go ahead and get that number out your head. You will not find that in Houston. But I was able to live in half and rent the other half. And I did that for a little over a year and a half. And that was a perfect timing in the market, and when we had all the really high just the market was moving really fast at that time. And so I was able to get almost $100,000 in equity during that year and a half that I lived in that duplex. And I actually would have got the 100K, but the appraiser, when we sold it, dropped us down by 20, and so I ended up getting 80K out of it. But it was still just an incredible blessing. I was able to time the market, and so I think we're now in a similar opportunity zone, right? You talked about we're going into a new real estate cycle. So talk about the impact that someone, if you're buying a house in 2024, 2025, what that impact will be in the next 10, 15 years.
So yeah, obviously. So now in 2024, we're moving out of 2023 almost to 2025. We're at, in my opinion, the start of a new real estate cycle. So essentially, this is a great time to be a buyer, right? You see all of the inventory that's come into the market, both in established duplexes and also new construction duplexes. So if you're buying right now, it's an awesome time, because one thing you want to consider is that you don't have as much competition. And so that's huge right now. And how to negotiate with sellers right now. There are a lot of different things you can do that really differentiate how most people bought previously. Now you can use free tools that you can find on the internet and kind of also get an idea around if you have a distressed new construction seller. A lot of people don't know those exist, but they're all over the place, believe it or not. So, and even some of the wealthiest people I personally know, a lot of times, sometimes we think something isn't in reach, but most of them, their first real estate investment was a single family house or a duplex. Or one of the wealthiest guys I know, his first purchase out of college, this was in 2000, was a fourplex. This guy is now worth $300 million, right? And so this all happened over the course of just 20, 25 years. And when you think about it, that's not that long, right? So you can set your family up for great things, and not just your family, but you can impact your community around you. You see the awareness around investing now, especially real estate investing. So I think that's one of the things that kind of makes me the happiest, to see people like us be able to get into these spaces and grow.
Yeah. And you gave me an example when we talked on the phone. If you buy a property that's roughly $500,000 now, by 2034, that property will probably have appreciated around $1 million, right? So thinking about, if you want to have $1 million of net worth, basically you just need to get 3 or 4 properties between now and 2034, and there you are, right?
Yeah,
just based off the appreciation of your property.
Absolutely, so, absolutely. And that's one of the big things about Houston. Not to knock any other region in America, but if you guys think about what makes Houston area such a special place, is because as an investor, you can get cash flow. And what Mike alluded to, you can get that appreciation. A lot of other markets, they have great cash flow, but they don't have the appreciation. But that's one of the things that Houston is going to have and continue to have. And we're one of the most resilient real estate markets. If you look at the data over the last 20 years, even going back to the Great Recession, 2008, if you look at Houston, we had some of the least effects and we bounced back the quickest. Even now, it's been a little bit of a pullback and investors are a little bit shy, but our area, you still see a lot of new construction around. You still see a lot of people rehabbing existing buildings. And that's always a great sign. Anytime you see private investment without the help of the government, that's the big thing that Houston has over a lot of other metros right now. Nobody is touching us, maybe except Dallas, Fort Worth. So
yeah, and I think a big thing, just so y'all know, what drives a steady real estate market is the job economy. So Houston, historically, because of oil and gas, because of our medical centers, that's what's keeping people coming here, and people are able to have stable income, they're able to have extra money to spend on investment properties. So when you're thinking about where you buy a duplex and the cities that you're investing in, you got to think about those other things, right? Transportation is also a big thing. You think of all the highways. I know we're tired of sitting in traffic, but those highways create connectivity, right? And that connectivity also helps stabilize your real estate economy. So those are really big things that you want to think about when you are investing. What are some of the, you would say, what are some of the hot areas in Houston that somebody should be looking at to buy a duplex? If you have any zip codes particularly, or areas?
I have a list of zip codes. Personally, I have zip codes I favor. The one we're in right now, 77033. Obviously, it's right south of the 610 loop, and it has the greatest proximity to schools, University of Houston, Rice University, TSU, medical schools, jobs, the airport. So that's something you want to consider, is proximity to where people go to work or spend money, or even if you're into the STR space, a lot of weekend travelers to Houston come for sporting events, or they come for holidays or stuff like that. But outside of this one I'm in, I would also say 77051. That's a great zip code for duplexes as well. You just want to be a little bit careful there because deed restricted areas don't allow necessarily for duplexes. So I'd share that one. Another up and coming zip code for some duplexes, 77047. You find some pockets there. That zip code is unique because you're able to, send your kids to some of the suburban, the Pearland ISD schools
Alvin
if you're
ISD.
there. So that kind of helps a little bit if you're looking at a market where people are concerned with their kids going to school. Outside of that, there's some areas further north, 77088, also an area. And what makes the north side of Houston a little bit different than the south side, the north side has a little bit more established civic clubs and HOAs, so they're more active compared to the south side. On the south side, they're not as active. They have a lot of active ones. I'd also say 77021, South Union area. And, from an appraisal standpoint, you get a higher value there because it's inside of the loop. But there are a lot of areas all over the Houston market. But, me specifically, I like to deal inside.
Yeah, so basically take notes on those, send those to your agent, but hey, find me a duplex in these zip codes. That's the way right there. I alluded to this a little bit, but there's an appreciation approach and there's a cash flow approach, right? So I know investors that have properties that don't really make them money, but they use it to build a portfolio and then they borrow from that portfolio to do their build projects or whatever else they're trying to do. So that's one route. Those people sometimes use that to offset taxes, right? So maybe they're a high earner, they're an attorney or something, they use their real estate to basically like show a loss in real estate to drop down their taxable income. So that's a strategy. You also have your cash flow, right? So your cash flow is, hey, whatever the differences between your expenses and how much money you get, right? So for the cash flow, Blake, I think that's the one that most people are looking for. The appreciation play is for a little bit, I think maybe for more higher net worth individuals, but for the, the average person trying to get into their first or second investment, what's a good cash flow number that you think you can get from a duplex? Is it like $200 a month, $300 a month? Like what's kind of a good?
I think it just depends on like what approach, how you got into it. Of course, you always make your money and your equity in the buy, but there are a lot of lending products that require you to live in the duplex for a year, like FHA or the 0% down loans that require you to live there for a year. So in many of those cases, you probably won't cash flow. It just helps you make your liability, come down a little bit a month. But if you're at a point where both doors are leased, I think it's reasonable to expect on your first deal, assuming that you put a decent amount down, to at least be able to cash flow $200 to $300 a door. That's really feasible. So your duplex should be making you about $500-600 a month if you bought it right and you took a good look at what the rents are, and then depending on your strategy too. So this cash flow strategy is if you just do purely long-term rental, but there's also plays like midterm rental and short-term rental where that cash flow number can go up significantly, but at the same time you're probably going to have more expenses. So you have to learn the skills to be a good operator, right?
Okay. Yeah, which is, we're in the unit right now, which is fully furnished. This is a midterm rental you use. So how are you finding people to get in here? Like what platforms or softwares are you using?
So different platforms and softwares you can use. Obviously the most popular one, Airbnb. Obviously Airbnb is the most popular. Then you have Vrbo, you have Furnish Finder, you have Booking.com. Then you also can establish your own generation of leads, because one of the things I do as these guests come in, we take their information, we interact with them, because Houston is a destination city, if you guys don't know. So a lot of the people that are coming here are coming to make decisions on like where they're gonna be living. I had a guest come to this exact unit and they were coming here to see which house they would buy where. So you always wanna make sure you're interacting with people as they come in, especially if they come from out of town, because Houston is a destination city. Even, us, look at me and you, we didn't grow up in Houston, but we ended up in Houston and we made Houston home.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. So you mentioned maintenance costs. What are some of the maintenance costs people should be thinking about for the long-term or midterm play? So
for that strategy, obviously you have the energy bill, water bill. Water bills aren't as bad right now. If you're building inside the city limits, all the water bills are through the city of Houston. You can expect like a vacant duplex unit up to a one that's fully occupied to maybe do like anywhere from $30 to $40 a month. But the electric, that's a bigger expense. So there's a local energy broker, Clutch City Energy. I recommend him. I think he's on Instagram as well. He's also a property owner, and he also operates in that STR space. So you can definitely make sure you shop your electric rate. And then something else, the technology piece. Make sure that your thermostats are smart technology enabled. It's a little bit more of an upfront expense, like when you put it in, but it's important because that way you can really monitor and program, hey, I don't care how much they press that AC down, it's not going to go lower than 70 degrees. And it's just a way to, kind of monitor your electric usage and not get crazy.
Okay.
Because in the summer months, if you're not paying attention to, you'll mess around and get an $800,000 bill. So you got to really make sure that you get this technology in place.
Okay, got you. And would you recommend for investor, maybe this is their second, third investment property, or maybe their first time doing a duplex, should they go, would you recommend the long-term or the mid-term in terms of, or was that kind of just based on what their goals
I think
are?
it's just based on your risk tolerance, right? The long-term renter is a safer route, and that's how banks and most lenders will underwrite you, right? Most don't underwrite on the short-term rent because it's not something the lending community is comfortable around. So long-term rent, they're going to be there 12 months. And so your lender is saying, okay, this is the income, 75% of this we'll give to you in your income. So long-term is always safer. But I think, as you kind of move up the food chain, I believe in having dynamic properties, right?
Okay.
So this one, let's say if I wanted to have a long-term tenant in here, they can come in with or without the furniture. We could turn it around for them in a quick, period of time. So.
Okay, got you. And would you recommend doing building a duplex, like new construction, or recommend buying one that's already been built by someone else, maybe it's a couple years old?
I think it's just up to your comfort level, because the name of the game in investing is equity. It's always going to be equity. You want to be able to buy an asset or buy a property, and after the close, have equity in the property already. So to answer your question, obviously, if you're looking at new construction, you want to definitely do a build to rent or, a build to rent product, because it's going to leave you potentially, if you do it right, in a position where you have 20 to 30% or more in equity after day one. And then just think about it, with all the new build to sell developers coming into the market, the activity is there. So when appraisers go to do comps, whether it's a year or 2 or 3 or 4 from now, and you want to maybe pull some equity out, you'll be in a good position. But that's the cool thing and beauty about Houston. I mean, you can get new construction, but then you can also get something that may not be as new, but it's just a great position to buy. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And most likely, if you're buying new construction, you're going to be buying the top of the market. If you buy something that's maybe a couple of years older, you potentially could get a deal where maybe there's some room.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If you buy something that's a couple of years old, and even, I'll be honest with you, there are a lot of deals off market as well as on the MLS. And then if you know that there are a lot of deals right now if you deal with construction lenders. Construction lenders, and also conventional bank lenders that lent on construction projects in Houston. If there are some people that are struggling, you'll be surprised at the type of discount you can get on those deals.
Yeah, so my broker is actually building some duplexes not far from here, and the creative options that she has told me that they can do are mind-blowing. There's really a lot of creative things when you start getting into the new construction space about how you can move money around to make deals happen.
Absolutely.
So we've kind of talked about financing, and that's probably what everyone's thinking, okay, cool, this sounds great, how much is it gonna cost me? What I gotta spend?
Right, absolutely.
So talk about what some of those financing options are. So you mentioned the construction loan, what are the routes that you think people should take? Obviously you have the FHA route, which you would use if you're gonna house hack it, live in half, rent the other half. What are the options if maybe you aren't going to live into it? What are some options there?
So some options if you're not going to live in a duplex and you want to buy it. Obviously, the cheapest money, 9 out of 10, if you're going to take a loan, it's going to be with a conventional bank. And the difference with a conventional bank, they have these underwriting guidelines that you have to check these boxes, right? From an income, debt to income, credit score, that type of stuff. But if you're not in position to get that cheap money, there's an interesting product that it's not new, but a lot of us didn't have awareness to it. It's called DSCR, debt service coverage ratio loan, where they lend you based on the rent you're going to get against the debt. So that's an option that's out there. But again, I always tell people it's so important what your buy price is. So it's a great market to be in, but the smart investor is going to make sure that they're sharp when it comes to negotiating.
So what's a good price to find a duplex at?
It just depends. I mean, you find duplexes right now priced as low as $390,000. We're building one for a guy who has it on the MLS right now for $435,000. You have them all the way up to over $600,000 right now. It just depends depends on what your strategy is going to be. I think a lot of the higher priced duplexes you see in the market, they are those owner occupied duplexes where someone's going to live in a half, so they want a very nice product to be in, and that's their flavor and that's their taste. But you want to be really smart about your buy price, because that's going to set the tone for a whole lot of things: your property taxes, your insurance, how you can cash flow or not. So be a shark at that negotiating table.
Gotcha. Okay. And so for the you said the DSCR loan, is that one of the kind of loan where you have to bring 20% to the table if you're doing?
Well, DSCR loans, so that's great, especially if you can buy a building at value. And that means like you're coming to the table either with the 20% in your pocket, or you found a distressed buyer and they're having to let this thing go, and you buy it for 80 to 70% of its true value. And so now you're not even really having to come to the table with any money. We've been able to take advantage of DSCR loans in some of our new builds as well. The cool thing with that, again, they're not looking at your financial situation. They are looking purely at the asset. And some of the tips when it comes to DSCR I'd share with people is that you want to create a paper trail. Whenever you get tenants, you want them to definitely pay their deposit either via money order or cashier's check with their name on it, with what it's for, so it's documented. Because DSCR, it's easier to get, but they still have boxes you want to be able to check. So
don't use Cash App or Venmo for rent.
No, don't do that.
And there's a lot of softwares out there that'll do this all for you. There's, you might pay a little bit for them, but they'll track all that stuff for you. So we'll link some of those in the description as well. So we're about to leave here and go look at some different properties. And I think what people will notice, there's like different styles of duplexes, right? You have your top bottom duplexes and you have your side by side, right? So we're currently in a kind of a side by side. This is actually kind of interesting because it's side by side and two story.
Yeah, exactly.
So like talk about the differences, so then when people see it, they can kind of recognize what they're looking at in terms of the style and like maybe why people do one or the other.
Yeah, so obviously with the intensification around density and the livable places ordinance in Houston, you're getting people replatting lots. Like we've been replatting lots since 2017, but now what you see now, people are even getting more creative and they're going for more density. So you'll see a lot more stacker duplexes where it's one unit on top of the other, because you're looking at a narrow lot that might be 35 feet wide or less. And so that allows you to fit a lot more duplexes if you have like one vacant land site. Obviously you're able to get more dense there, but in those situations when you have units on top of each other, you have to consider, okay, how does this change the tenant experience? So one of the things we would do to kind of make it a little bit of a better situation for the tenants is we just layer it with R38 insulation in between the floors. That way, the noise is a little bit more deadened. You'll see a lot of the split level duplexes like what we're in. It's a little bit more traditional where it's one unit on one side and another on the other. But there's a wide range of duplexes. You just really want to make sure that you understand the market you're getting into, the realistic rents, right? Not marketed rents, but what you can really get. And then also, if you do choose the STR midterm route, like what that really looks like.
And when he says marketed rents, the difference between that's like what they show you and then what it actually rented for, because the market price isn't always what there could be negotiations. That's the same thing with the sales price too. Like you could see something active, hey, it's acted at 520. That doesn't mean that the person bought it at 520. In Texas, we have rules where basically you can't sometimes know what that is. So that's when you need to work with a real estate professional that has access to that data and can tell you, hey, they listed it here, but here's what they actually bought it at. So wanted to definitely throw that in there as well. Shameless plug for myself. That's why working with a realtor is in your best interest, because there's not always data that you have access to as a consumer. Okay, so I've seen this trend where people are doing duplexes, but they're like separate. They're not joined together. There's like a little bit of space in between. And essentially, if they have the same legal description, they're still a duplex or multifamily. Yes. What are your thoughts on that? Is that like, because technically some people they look almost like they're townhomes, right? But they're still marketed as duplexes. What are your thoughts on those? Yeah, my thoughts on those, I mean, it's just all ties back to land use and just the developer's taste, right? Not just that, but you also have to think from an ownership perspective, what does that look like from the insurance, right? Or if you have an issue happen on one roof but not the other, now you're dealing with two separate roofs, two separate foundations. So you want to think about those kind of things, right? In your decision making as a long-term owner. So that comes into play, but with the livable places ordinance and the
strive for density now, you're just going to see a lot more creative things happening. So keep all those.
And I think the key word with those is firewall. And so the firewall is essentially, if you have two units that are side by side, the firewall is basically a special material they put in between those to keep one, like if one catches on fire, to keep the other one, like it'll burn down slower. So it kind of takes a little time. So if you have a top bottom unit, you have a firewall at between or side, depending on how your duplex is centered out. And so that's one thing. I think you still need the firewalls even when you have your units that are separate, right?
Yeah, you still need the firewalls. It's just a design to keep a fire contained for an hour or two to give the fire department or response teams time to, mitigate the fire, put the fire out and save people. So it's important. Okay,
last couple questions for you. So the zip codes we talked about, 77033, 77047, 77051, 77088. You drive around and, like, let's be honest, it looks like the hood, right? And so they're developing neighborhoods. What would you say to someone who has concerns about, living in a developing neighborhood?
So I'm gonna look into the camera for this one, right? We have to internalize this. You can't focus about just right now. Investing is a journey, right? It's great to get into some great neighborhood, but the price point for that great neighborhood is gonna be higher. So, those great neighborhoods are more wealth preservation plays where you're not getting cash flow, right? It just appreciates. But for most of us, we're just getting into our journey. So we have to have a long-term vision. I think my wife and I started investing in this community in 2012, 2013. And I can tell you, I'm living proof, and I can tell you that the values have more than doubled since then. So you have to have a long-term vision. Things are gonna get better, right? We're gonna respect people that have been here generationally. We're going to give them their input. We lease to them long term. We sell products to them long term. So I think it's very important that you just have a long term mindset. I think sometimes we get focused on the here and now, but time moves quickly. Y'all will see that the older you get. So, just be patient and really dig your feet in and take a long-term approach.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And I think for some of these areas, there's concerns about crime rates and things like that, especially here in 77033. One thing I do want to know is sometimes there's concentrated crime that happens in typically lower income apartment complexes and areas like that sometimes throw off the crime data in your area. So obviously that's something you need to do your own research on. But specifically in this neighborhood, this is actually an older neighborhood. So there's people, senior citizens really are the dominant group in this area. So some of those crime statistics don't tell the full story of what's happening in the area. So that's something you should be thinking about when someone says, oh, you're about to buy a house in the hood, right? Okay, well, listen, there might be in the street you're on or the pocket you're in, there's really not much crime, but there might be an apartment complex down the road where there's a lot of activity being generated. So those are just things, those are really high level things that you don't know unless you're talking to someone who invests in the area, actually understands the area. So especially in Houston, there are a lot of, you talk about 3rd Ward, 5th Ward, people have preconceived notions about these areas and aren't necessarily grounded in reality anymore, right? And so definitely make sure you don't just go off of what your aunt and uncle told you, talk to people, talk to myself, talk to Gilbert and be like, hey, what's the reality of what am I looking at in these neighborhoods? Which takes me to the point you said was something you learned was, building fences around your property. So talk about why you did that and some of the maybe some other mistakes or things that you've learned from your first group of properties.
So when I first started building duplexes and owning even single family rentals here, we didn't have the gates around our properties and it created better connectivity, right, with your neighbors. But something we need to be realistic with too is in a lot of these older communities, there's still a lot of foot traffic. People are walking, right? And so when it came to just that petty crime, pulling on car doors to see if the car was open or any other type of petty crime, we noticed that once we implemented the wrought iron fences and gates, that literally went to zero. So we've been doing these wrought iron gates and fences now for the greater part of the last 5+ years. And I kid you not, ever since we've done that, we don't have any instances of this. Everyone that lives here or in any other of our buildings, they know, this gate is here for a reason, right? It's here for us. So they know to close the gates and use the gates. And honestly, it's a small upfront cost when you consider the long-term viability. Remember, I'm trying to get everyone to think long-term, right? So for the long-term viability, it's a small long-term cost.
Right, and I think that's something to note is petty crime happens anywhere in Houston. So everywhere. I lived in River Oaks, people were still trying to open doors, breaking it. So again, going back to that whole, that crime narrative, that can happen anywhere. And so obviously things like having the gate around can mitigate those. That's also another maintenance cost, right? So you do have a gate, your gate could break. My HOA, the gate breaks like every week. So they're constantly out there fixing that thing. So those are things to think about as well. Like, hey, when you're looking at, if you're doing a cash flow play, yeah, you're cash flowing $500-$600 a month, but you need to be recognized that, hey, I need to stack some of that bread for when I have to replace the gate or something happens, and I have to, fix a door or some whatever. So those are things you need to be thinking about in terms of, hey, this isn't just like play money, right? You need to be really serious about what you're going to do long term with your cash, whether you're going to reinvest that into your business, you're going to use that to offset your lifestyle or other things. So those are things that you should consider, and that's what I learned from my first duplex was the maintenance costs were a lot higher than I thought. And that's just home ownership in general, right? Something's always going to happen. And so basically my first year, I didn't take any money out of the duplex. I just kept putting it into a savings account, and it saved my butt because 2 days before I sold it, the AC unit went out, and I unfortunately had to pay for that, right? And so I had to pay like $3 or $4 grand to get that fixed, right? So thankfully I had some cash sitting there that I hadn't spent that I could go ahead and put to mitigate that. That obviously sucks because I was like, dang, I'm over here trying to make money and I'm spending money trying to sell this. But those are just things you want to be aware of, and we don't want to, definitely, I think sometimes people paint it with rose-colored glasses in terms of what the reality is. And so we want to be real with you about that. There's amazing benefits. We've already talked about some of those, but those are just some realities to think about. Anything you want to end us with? Any last tips, things that you think people should know?
Yeah, I think the thing I'll end with is always think long-term as an investor. You make money in your buy. Be a shark at the negotiating table. Even if it's a bright, shiny object, trust me, there's some distress.
What do you mean by be a shark? Like, what is that? What's an
what
example
that means
of that?
is like, I'm a sales professional. My background is over 25 years in sales. And what that means is when you go to negotiate, even with great realtors like Mike, establish your boundaries, right? As far as like what you'll pay and what you're looking for. Oftentimes there are a lot of sellers right now that, they're itching to get rid of their product, right? I come from a world where I understand what it is to make interest payments when your duplex is sitting empty. It's not a good feeling. So, you definitely want to be a shark at the negotiating table and always think long term. I think a lot of times we kind of think about right now. Don't think about right now. Think about 2030, think about 2032, because it's right around the corner and it's coming. There's a reason you look around Houston and you see all the infrastructure changes. You see the mayor even talking now about, establishing place for homeless to live now. There's a reason why, so many people are coming into Houston. Don't get left behind. Don't be the person saying, I shoulda 5-6 years from now, because I say it now, me and my wife say it about what we should have been doing when we were in our 20s without any kids, and good jobs, things that we didn't do, but late is better than never. We were a little bit late to the party, but get involved and get active.
Man, awesome. All right, we got time for one question. Actually, I'm gonna make it two because we got a couple of people in the room. Any questions y'all want to ask of Gilbert while we have him here?
I have a question, but mine is 2 questions.
Okay. well, I guess we got 3 questions. Just make them quick.
So my first question, I bought single family homes, I bought a townhouse. I've always sold them because I don't want to be a landlord. I've been turned off from being a landlord. So this will be the first time I'm actually thinking about buying a property to become a landlord. So what advice would you give to those who are landlords or want to be a landlord?
And so let me say the question just in case I can't hear it. So the question was, what advice do you have for someone who wants to be a landlord, has maybe has been a little afraid of doing that before, but now they're ready to kind of take that step?
So my answer to that would be, and this is coming from a landlord, the most important part, one of the most important of being a landlord is vetting your tenant, right? You get the right to establish, hey, what type of tenant do you want? There are a lot of different tenants you can get. Some people like to do Section 8 plays. Some people just like traditional rentals where it's not Section 8 income, but you really need to learn the skill of vetting tenants, right? That's step one. Know how to vet a tenant, right? Know how to decipher fake paycheck stuff. Know what's not real, right? There are a lot of different things you can do. And then once you vetted your tenant and your tenant is in, property management is huge, right? Knowing how to manage that property, or if you're going to hire a property manager, make sure you're choosing a property manager that really knows the area where you're investing, because every property management company isn't created the same. But I implore people to learn property management skills. I think you'll earn a lot of cash flow there. And then as you get past 10, 12, maybe doors, then maybe you can consider hiring a property manager. But I think at first it's important for everyone to really learn those property management skills.
And then my second question, so if I do get an FHA loan on a duplex and I live in it, how long do I have to live in it before it can be occupied for both sides? And then as soon as I get in, can I already rent out the other side? Or is it a period you have to wait?
Yeah, so question is, can I use the FHA loan to buy the duplex? And then how long do I have to live in it before I can get a tenant in it, correct?
On one side and then on both sides.
One side and then both sides, okay, got it.
So you can you can use an FHA loan and buy an already occupied duplex unit. We used to sell them like that when we first started. Our catch was like, hey, we'll manage it for you free for a year. So we'd find a tenant after we built it and then sell it with one side occupied. And to answer your question, FHA has guideline rules. You have to occupy that space for a year and a day before you can move out and use the other side as a rental. Now, to my understanding, maybe you can elaborate better, but I think there are some conventional loans that have lower down payments now where you don't necessarily have to be there for a year and a day.
Right.
So
yeah, they're definitely, a lot of lenders have some creative opportunities and those kind of get kind of niche. But yeah, there's definitely, if you're a medical professional, I know of some lenders that have some specific programs for those kind of things. So you can get creative to figure that out.
But essentially a year.
Yeah, a year. Yeah, and a year goes by fast. So
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, one more question. Yeah.
So you talked about, as far as like make sure you get your money every month. What advice do you give? It's a two-part question. Do you advise? How do they determine if home actually qualifies for Section 8, and then two, do you advise even going that route?
Okay, question is, how do you qualify? How does a home qualify for Section 8, and then do you recommend going that route?
Yeah, I think, so that's a great question. Section 8 is obviously guaranteed income. I'm a Section 8 landlord. I literally sold my last Section 8 rental I own yesterday, and that's for personal reasons, and I think some of that'll start to get exposed. But Section 8 is a government-backed program, so you can go locally to Houston Housing Authority's website. You can see what they'll pay in the zip code you're in. So it's an interesting play. A lot of people do. They'll try to, build duplexes or buy duplexes that are in tier A or B neighborhoods. And the reason that's important is because they'll pay a little bit higher, right? And so when you're first starting out, you're looking for, rents to be a reasonable number. So I think like in a 2-bedroom unit right now in this area, Section 8 will pay you anywhere from like $1,400 to maybe $1,600 a unit. 3-bedroom, you start to get a little bit higher, $1,600 to $1,800. So it's just your take. There are a lot of different strategies you can take, but even with Section 8 rentals, you still want to vet tenants and, get a good profile of what type of tenant you want to, lease to.
And I'll say I had a friend who just told me a story the other day, had a family, her sister, family member had some issues and had to come to Houston, was in a tough bind, and they were able to get her in Section 8, high quality tenant, had a stable job, was just kind of in a rough situation. And so I think sometimes there's this stigma about Section 8 that they're gonna like tear your house up and that they're, specific types of individuals. But I think you can also get really high quality tenants. And like you said, you just gotta do the work and have your processes in order to make sure you get those folks. But if you can do that, then yeah, that guaranteed income, especially if it's your first one, can mitigate your risk big time. So that's definitely one that I would recommend seriously considering. So man, thank you so much, bro. Man, y'all put us on game. We're actually gonna go tour some other properties. You guys will see those here in the video in a little bit. But thank y'all for watching. If you have more questions, drop that in the description or in the comments wherever you're watching, and we'll try to get those answers to you. Again, thanks for watching the Blueprint Podcast. We'll see y'all next time.